Hi, I'm Julie Ross.
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
And you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
Look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging, to say the least. With a few skills under our belts, though, we might just be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about sex.
My favorite topic.
Yeah, here we go. This is going to be insane. Not really, because we're going to talk about sex and your kids.
Right.
And I guess how you communicate to your children about sex and what's important to say, what's important to share. What is the most common? Do you feel like this is a conversation that goes on? I mean, I will just say for myself personally, very little to zero. I remember like my father making one comment to me as I walked out the door. I think I was 17 at the time. And I may have even said this to him. He literally said something like, "Be careful." And I think I had a serious girlfriend, and I think maybe he was subliminally trying to say, you know, and I basically was like, That ship has sailed, Dad. I'm now 17. So that was kind of my own personal experience with it. What was so funny, which was very little to none.
Right, sure.
And so is that common, you think?
I mean, in my experience, it's extremely common. Right. I think parents feel like a couple of things. I feel like, first of all, parents are squeamish.
Yeah, so they're uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable.
It is. And look, I get that. When I was growing up, I mean, my parents were the most kind of private. I mean, we didn't talk about any of that stuff either, right? So when I began teaching, I thought, well, I have to learn to talk about this stuff. And I had to practice a lot because all of the terminology made me uncomfortable.
You mean even with your own kids?
Yeah,
right.
For sure. So I had to really think it through, practice out loud so that I didn't convey too much discomfort. And when it was uncomfortable, I just admitted, hey, this is uncomfortable, guys, but I'm going to talk about it anyway.
Right.
So I think parents are squeamish, and I think that causes them to be hesitant about talking about it because they feel embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
I think they feel like they don't know enough about it to talk about it, which is really funny because if you've got a 3-year-old who says, "Why is the sky blue?" right? You're going to expound upon that.
Mm-hmm.
And do you really know why the sky is blue? I don't really
know.
No,
but you're going to give it a shot.
But you're going to give it a shot and you're going to go, "Oh, well, blah, 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 blah." But if your child says, what is
what's
sex?
What's a penis?
Yeah, what's a penis or what's a vagina? All of a sudden you clam up. And yet if you have a child, you do know what it is.
Sure.
I mean,
so it's that same sort of provincial
there.
Thing that people just are it becomes an uncomfortable conversation. Is there a certain age that you feel, it's when parents should start communicating about it to their kids?
Oh, absolutely. I really firmly believe that people should be talking to their toddlers about sex.
But how does it manifest, though, at that age?
Well, so at that age, it's calling body parts by their names.
Mm-hmm.
It's talking about how babies are made.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go into the whole relationships.
Yeah, maybe the more
stuff.
Sophisticated ideas you're saying.
Right, or safety or anything like that.
Right, and I just want to make the point because I think it's important to say, because you have a chapter about this in your book.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that sort of jumped out at me is you said to not think about this as the big talk. Now I'm going to sit down and talk to my kids about sex, because you might have a few of those moments, but the idea that you communicate is that it should be an ongoing conversation. So certainly if you're going to be talking to a toddler,
mm-hmm.
you're going to start with some more basics maybe that evolve over time as the child gets older.
Right. And the point of talking to a toddler about it is to create a very kind of calm, factual stance around it, so that by the time they start getting kids start teasing around it at school,
right,
which can be as early as kindergarten.
Well, you also say in the book that I thought was really interesting is that if you haven't talked to your kids about sex by the age of 7, that they've already heard a lot about it, and much of it is misinformation.
Oh, completely. Completely. I remember when my daughter came home from kindergarten once and she said, "Mommy, so and so," another kid in in kindergarten with her, "so and so is having sex with her boyfriend." And I almost fell over. I said, what?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, sweetheart, let's talk about that. Let's unpack it. But also, that's not really an appropriate thing to be talking about."
Right.
Well, it turned out that my daughter had then, because she thought it was cool what this kid was saying, she told me, she said, "Mom, but I went around and I said I'm having sex with my boyfriend too."
Hey, we all want to fit in.
5 years old. And I'm like, okay.
Now, had you had a conversation with her by 5 about sex a little bit, just in terms of the facts of it, maybe?
We had the conversation at that point about all the body parts,
Right.
calling them the correct things.
Which is what you're saying, maybe at a toddler's age is the place that you could start. Because
Right.
you break it down, when you talk about what you communicate in terms of sex to the child, you break it down to facts is one section, reassuring them, and we'll get into that, but that's about how you feel about sex, your ideas, maybe your desires, and then finally articulating your values is the third component.
Right, exactly.
But when they're a toddler, you're dealing with the facts, I guess, to start.
Yeah, and part of talking about this to toddlers is for protection against sexual predators, because the most common age at which children are sexually molested is 3 years old. That's a horrifying fact. And parents, are likely to say that's not true, but it is, because if you think about it, sexual predators are charm-based predators.
Sure.
So they work their way into your life. It might be an uncle. It might be a grandfather. It might be, here in New York, a doorman. And a 3-year-old, right, is very vulnerable because, sit on my lap.
Right.
Oh, we're going to have special hugs.
Right.
So if the child doesn't know what their quote unquote private parts are and able to call them by name, then they can't refute whatever anybody's saying.
Yeah. It's funny because it's actually hard for me to even go there in my mind.
I know. It's gross.
Yeah, no,
right?
It's difficult. But I think you've also made the point previously that I think you said it's 1 out of 6 girls and 1 out of 10 boys by the age of
18.
Right, have been molested. So, I mean, that's not your main component maybe of why you're sharing this, but that's a component of it, right?
It is a component.
So this idea that they have a basic understanding of body parts and sex and intimacy, even as a toddler?
Well, that sex is something that's for grown-ups.
Right.
And only between grown-ups, never between a grown-up and a child, never between 2 children. And that's kind of the basic way to start. Listen, I know a 5-year-old from many years ago who was molested by a male babysitter. And he told her that he was going to give her a special massage.
Right.
And you don't need to go into the details of that, but let's just say that, the special massage, very inappropriate. It was it was sexual.
Sure. And
she ended up telling her mother, and we can kind of talk about how you can set that up for success. But of course, that stopped it right there. But the problem is if the child doesn't know that that's sexual,
right,
then, if it's about their vagina or their clitoris or their penis or their scrotum, if they don't know that those are anything that touches that area is sexual, then can be a massage, quote unquote.
Sure.
Yeah,
so it seems partly that and partly, there's a couple things I thought of as you were talking that, because if you don't talk about it at all, you may reach the point where they're 16 and it's really hard and you have to have the big talk, even though by then they know everything and probably half of it is misinformed. But it seems like the idea that if you start this conversation with your toddler, even in a small way, you're now setting up this dynamic like, oh, we have a conversation about sex, and you don't have to go through every single element of it. And predation is part of why you're sharing it, but I think part of it is too that it's established like if you don't, they're gonna get it from school like very quickly, and that's not helpful either. So if you can start really basic,
right?
Is that the idea?
Well, and also it makes it more comfortable talking about it later.
Right.
You know,
when you come back to it.
Right. When, you know, around the age when they begin to awaken sexually, you know, which usually isn't until early adolescence. And, you know, they start to have these feelings. If you've already established this kind of conversational tone around it, then they can come back and ask you questions. It's not loaded at all.
Right.
You know, then when you say, hey, I want to talk to you about, you know, blowjobs, or I want to talk to you about, then, you know, they're not diving under a pillow and saying, oh, no, gross,
which they might be anyway, but
it
might be a little less if you've sort of established this thing.
Definitely.
Okay.
Exactly.
So how do you begin? Well, there's a couple things. I think you also mentioned this in your book too, which I thought was interesting, is this idea that you as the parent have to get, if you have some embarrassment around the words or the language, like you have to start there. If you're uncomfortable with the word vagina or clitoris or any of those words, that you have to start with that list yourself and get comfortable before you approach the child.
Exactly.
And then how do you do that? How do you have that conversation?
There's a lot of different ways you can have that conversation.
I mean, I just have to admit, like, I feel super fortunate because my wife is a therapist and has like zero issue with talking about it. So she's always been very forthright. Like I was thinking back, as my son is now 20, I may have had some conversations with him. I'm not sure I talked about it too much with my girls, that my wife sort of took over there and was very, 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 very comfortable having those discussions. And is that okay too? Like, does it necessarily have to be both parents sitting down to start this journey? I guess ideally, maybe it is.
I mean, I think ideally, because if something comes up, let's say girl gets her period, right? Or a child gets their period, and there's only one parent that child feels comfortable talking to about their period, but that parent isn't available because they're on a business trip or they are taking care of an ailing parent or whatever, then they
have that. I mean,
awkward.
I'm smiling because I sort of had this experience with one of my daughters, that I was actually home when it happened, and we hadn't had a lot of conversations about it. Certainly. I can't remember maybe even having one, but I know that she felt comfortable enough. I think my wife may have been at work seeing patients, couldn't reach her, that immediately when it happened, my daughter was like, hey, this happened. And I was like, okay, this is what we have to do. Okay, I think. And she felt comfortable kind of talking to me about it. Because I guess the idea is that if you don't set up that dynamic, they'll just have to deal with that experience. She would have had to figure it out and not say anything and fumble along on her own. And ideally, she's able to go to, your daughter or son is either to go to, is able to go to both parents.
Exactly. And when we're talking about, specifically when we're talking about sexual interest, right? I think there needs to be that general comfort, because you don't want your child, regardless of their gender and regardless of their sexual identity, to have the first time that they are talking to someone with whom they want to be romantically involved, that you don't want it to be the first time that they talk to that person of that gender with that, you know, without having talked to an adult.
You mean you don't want their first conversation about sex to be with the person they're trying to figure it out with? This idea that as a parent you've informed them, so now when they're in this circumstance with a girlfriend or boyfriend, partner or whatever, that it's not the first time they're sort of fumbling through these ideas. And I mean, it's going to be freaking weird and hard anyway, tricky.
Right.
But is that your point? Is that if
Yes.
you've now set up this dynamic and you've had these conversations along the way, that then when the person gets to that moment, it's not as overwhelming, ideally, right?
Right.
Or if you
Exactly.
feel comfortable, or if you have questions or concerns or frustrations, even in the moment, that's something you can hopefully go to the parent and talk about.
And go to either parent.
Right.
Regardless of the parent's gender or sexual identity too.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that you have this, kind of network of adults that that you can communicate to.
Yeah, and I guess it depends. So if the question is, what do you say and how do you start? It probably depends on the age, right? Because I think if you're a parent that's waited a long time and now they're like maybe even 12 before you're bringing it up is different than what you're talking when you're speaking to a 5-year-old or maybe a 16-year-old, which again, that ship has sailed if you're waiting that long. But I like that you say, one of the things you say in the book is, because this feels kind of open-ended. Now, I don't know if you do this with a toddler, but maybe you would, that you would say, hey, I want to talk to you about sex. This is funny because I feel so lucky that I had my wife, because this would be hard for me. I didn't really have to do that. But you would say, I want to talk to you about sex, but I don't want to repeat information you already have. Why don't you tell me what you know, and I'll fill in any gaps? And I think that's so cool about that is that then it doesn't become this thing of like, sit down, Johnny, and now I will tell you about the birds and the bees. You're immediately opening this thing up like, hey, what do you know?
Yeah.
And maybe even acknowledging, you say this in the book too, like, hey, this is uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable.
For sure.
It's a little, I know it's weird. Right?
Right, for sure, absolutely. I think putting that out on the table and saying, and calling a spade and going, it's uncomfortable, for sure, if you are. And there's always going to be a little element of discomfort. I mean, no matter how comfortable you are talking about it, there's always this, wow, am I really doing this?
Yeah,
kind of attitude. And so, I mean, and that's a great question to ask of kids who have probably already had some sex education in school.
Right, because they're getting a big piece of that. But I think why would you argue that, they're getting it in school, so I'm good. I don't really need to talk about it.
Right, because they're getting probably the basics, what goes where, the mechanics, I guess I would call it. But when we are silent as parents, we don't have then the conduit to communicate our values around it.
Mm-hmm.
And, no matter what those values are, whether it's, this is an intimate act between people who love each other, or whether this is an act that you need to make sure that you have mutual respect for one another.
Well, and the idea is that you're imparting these values. You're saying, this is how I feel about sex. Like, if you believe, like, I don't believe this, but if, let's say you don't believe in premarital sex, you feel like you should wait till you get married to have sex. It is the idea, not that you're like, this is how you should do it, but you might say, this is how I feel about sex.
Right, exactly. I think another component here is that we really we shouldn't put our heads in the sand as parents.
What do you mean?
So a lot of parents believe, well, if I don't talk about it,
right,
it won't happen, right? But there's a wonderful saying that goes, silence isn't golden, it's permission.
Wow.
And that's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And that's whether we're no matter what we're talking about, if we're silent about it, we're tacitly giving them permission to do it because we aren't communicating our values around it.
Well, that, and you make the point in the book a few times, and, you can read this in a million different places, this idea that, okay, you know what, if I talk about it, it's almost encouraging it. If I tell them about sex, talk to them about sex and intimacy and oral sex and they're going to hand jobs and they're going to be doing that'll encourage them to do it, when the reality is actually, and I only know this from reading your book and doing some other research, the reality is that the opposite is true.
Right.
In terms of pregnancy, in terms of STDs, that it actually goes up so much higher when you haven't had the conversation, which kind of makes sense, because even thinking back, like, I didn't, and they didn't, I'm 50. So when I was growing up, I don't even really remember sex education in school. Maybe I'm in the Midwest. Maybe we got a day in science class. So you don't have anything. You're fumbling along,
Exactly.
following your hormones and kind of figuring it out.
yeah.
And what does Steve say about it? And you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And it's freaking confusing. So this idea that if I don't talk to them about sex, they'll wait till they're married or they'll wait till they're older to have sex. They're not going to have sex at 12 or 13. If I mention at 12 or 13, they're going to run out and have sex. And
it's completely false.
Right.
In countries that are similar to the United States in terms of demographics, but who also have what I'm going to call institutionalized sex. In other words, it's taught as part of the curriculum beginning in pre-K. Pre-K.
Right. Like European nations, Scandinavian countries.
Correct.
Right?
Yes. Significantly lower sexually transmitted infections.
Teen pregnancies,
significantly lower teen pregnancy.
Right.
Significantly higher ages at which kids decide to have sex for the first time because they're informed about it and they're making good choices as opposed to making choices in a void where they have no real information.
Right.
So, I mean, we have these comparison studies that are very, very clear about the advantage of starting early and talking often about it.
I like that you say that a few times, that it should be an ongoing conversation. So it doesn't have to be that one big moment that's sort of overwhelming for everyone.
For sure. And kind of back to the head in the sand thing, I think it's really critical that parents recognize at some point their child is going to have sex. Not as a child, but, as they grow older, I would hope, most parents want their children to have a healthy sexual life.
Right.
And so it's going to happen at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can do a little bit of education around safety, around what we feel.
Values.
Yeah, what we feel, enhances the experience. And I don't mean the physical pleasure of it, but enhances the experience emotionally, then they're operating with a full, deck. And we haven't, hidden ourselves away and been like, well, this will never happen. Of course it's going to happen. Greg, I can't tell you how many parents I talk to whose children are 16 years old, 17 years old, who are making and have made some big mistakes. Kids who got a sexually transmitted infection, who now have to live with that for the rest of their life. They have to disclose that to each new sexual partner at age 19. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's mortifying.
It's a major burden to carry.
Mortifying.
Right.
And Gavin DeBecker, who I love to quote because he's one of the leading national safety experts in the United States, says, "Show me a child who knows nothing about sex, and I'll show you a highly qualified victim."
Which could, in a lot of ways, that's not just predation, whether it's turning into teen pregnancies, STDs. And so, I mean, just to keep hammering that idea, like, as uncomfortable as it might be for some parents, like, it's so imperative because otherwise you're just kind of swimming out there. And also, I think for the child, then it's not such an overwhelming experience. So if you're not literally talking about sex, let's talk about, masturbation or a wet dream for a boy. Like, I certainly never got any of that information from anyone. So even if you have a little taste of the idea of it, hey, this might happen, and I want you to know that it's totally normal, right? So then when it happens, you don't feel like, what the F is going on? And it can be scary and frightening. And then if you also don't have this conduit set up with hopefully your parents, both of your parents, you might not turn to them to ask them, but if that communication line is open, you might turn, or even if you've at least heard about what a wet dream is, it could be as simple as like, this is what a wet dream is, and it might occur, and if it does, it's normal.
Right, exactly.
I mean, you know what a huge difference that can make?
Huge. And the thing about masturbation, too, is, I would think you would want your child to know that they don't need a partner to be sexually satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not so that there's no shame around masturbation, so that they feel comfortable with, if they're getting the urge to pleasure themselves. What a wonderful thing to not have to go out and seek a partner, right?
And part of that is the reassurance component you talk about. So if we're talking about facts, reassurance, imparting your values,
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the reassurance piece, a part of it that you're letting them know, like, this is okay.
Right, exactly.
I mean, is there an age around you? If this is an ongoing conversation through the years, are you waiting to puberty to maybe talk about masturbation?
Well,
Wet dreams. When do you talk about birth control?
right. So that's a
And
wide
Juliet,
range
I
of stuff.
want you to answer all of those.
Okay, right now.
Go.
In one sentence.
Yes, all three of those. So
No problem.
Masturbation.
Well, let's talk about masturbation
Okay.
first. Because children masturbate at a very young age. Not all children.
And not whether they're, having an orgasm, but whether
No.
they're touching and, exploring.
Correct. They explore, they may not have an orgasm per se, but if you see your child touching themselves
Mhm.
and they're 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, call it what it is. Say, I know that feels good. It's called masturbation and it's perfectly fine. And it's not something you do in public.
Right.
Right? You want to go, you
Then you can talk about the privacy aspect
the
of
privacy, and you can go into your own room. That can be your private time, and it's wonderful. You should do it, just not in front of other people, right?
Mhm.
And that's important because, what does a kid know? So masturbation, that talk can start really, really early. I don't think you need to talk about wet dreams to a 5-year-old.
it. Right.
Right.
That's going to go way over the head, probably.
Right, because it's not
It's not going to be
something-
there as a
Right. I mean, for kids that are prepubescent, I think you want to kind of confine it to what the facts are.
great.
That this,
That makes sense.
and especially that these are, that sex is something that happens between grown-ups, not between a grown-up and a child, not between 2 children.
And I imagine, could you talk about consent and kind of not in a literal way, because the idea of consent is sort of this complicated issue to a toddler, but this idea that it happens between 2 people who love and respect each other.
Well, and I actually do think we should talk about consent with our kids at a very young age, because it can start simply with unwanted touch.
Mm-hmm.
Unasked for touch, right? And that can be somebody tickling,
Mhm.
and it can be completely non-sexual, completely innocent, but the child doesn't feel that they have the right to say no.
Right.
And we want to empower kids at
Well,
a
and-
very young age to say, no, that doesn't feel good. Or no, I don't want you to touch me that way.
I love that you use the word empower, because I don't think it's about, and maybe because this is my own thing, like the predation thing is just so hard to wrap my mind around.
I know.
But I kind of like, even in your tone, in terms of
Mhm.
how you're communicating to the child. So it's not like you're trying to scare the crap out of them.
At
You got to be
all.
aware of this. But you are
Right.
saying, like, right? I'm just picking this up as you're talking, is this idea of like, hey, this is, empowerment, and you should have the ability to say no to something you don't feel comfortable with. Like, you don't have to go on
Mhm.
and on about predators and someone who's going to take you, and
Right, exactly. And all
or
of
am I
my
just freaked out by this topic? And
well, all of my talk about predators is to, our audience, the adults who are listening to this. I want adults to freak out about it.
right.
Right. But I don't want you to go out and freak out your children about it. I
Mm.
want you to teach your children to pay attention to their gut. And if they have an uh-oh feeling in their gut, then it's uh-oh. And to
Mhm.
trust that.
hmm
All too often, parents do the opposite. So
You mean they don't follow their instincts about something?
Correct. Adults are really bad about following their instincts. Again, referring to Gavin DeBecker, he says, how many times have you, let's just say, I'm going to use a New York analogy, right? Stood at a bus stop next to somebody who's off in some way
hmm
and is maybe kind of approaching you, but you don't want to hurt their feelings, so you don't walk away.
hmm
that's not paying attention to your instincts, right? There's a wonderful group called Prepare here in New York City, and they teach these skills to children about how to know when you have an uh-oh feeling. And it can be as simple as somebody's puts their hand on your shoulder and you're like, don't touch me. We want to empower kids to say, no, don't touch me, and not worry about hurting somebody's feelings. Again, it doesn't even have to be sexual. It's just about autonomy, bodily autonomy. This is my body. Asking, can I have a hug? And having somebody go, no, not right now.
Right. And that's okay.
And you going, okay.
Right.
Doesn't hurt your feelings, right? Or vice versa. So all of this is empowerment for kids, both in terms of knowledge about what sex is, what the different forms of sex are, what's appropriate or inappropriate when we're talking about adults, children, self, others, and, what are high-risk situations. Don't ever go with someone, into another room if you, especially if you have a uh-oh feeling. Being able to access those instincts and not turn them off in that moment. And as parents, we have so much to do around this, because it starts with, why aren't you kissing grandma and grandpa hello? Because I don't want to. Right. Because they look weird.
Right.
Because, I'm all about respecting what kids want or don't want in this format, because it does come down to consent later on, right? What are we consenting to here?
Right. So they don't feel, and that could play out down the road. So they don't feel pushed into something that they don't necessarily want to do.
Correct.
And so consent can obviously be an ongoing conversation that goes on through the years, that evolves as a child gets more nuanced, more,
right,
intelligence about that.
And it starts with, if you don't want to be tickled, don't be tickled. Say no.
Right.
It's okay. I don't care who it is.
And what about like birth control? You tell this kind of mortifying story in the book about a mom that found a condom next to her. I think the boy was 13. It was sealed, so she had to have that conversation. But I don't know if she demonstrated putting it on a banana or was going to show him. And I was like, oh my God. I don't know that I could do that one. So where does that come into play in terms of birth control?
Oh, yeah. It's really important that no matter what your gender is, that you know how to put a condom on, either on yourself or on another person. And so, a banana, a cucumber. It might be aspirational, but, in terms of size. But but that's okay. Right? That's okay.
Yeah, you're right. It's hard, but you got to have it, right? It also probably makes it in that moment then, too, when you're fumbling around and trying to do it for the first time, at least if you've had a conversation about it, even if it's maybe excruciating,
yes,
that they now have this knowledge. I mean, it just makes me think, too, that the other thing to keep in mind, and I think you mentioned this in your book, that it can be overwhelming. You might have your kid go like, no way. Like, I'm not talking to you about this. This is mortifying.
Right.
And this idea to respect that and maybe circle back to it. Like, okay, I understand you're not comfortable right now. Maybe there's a time you can let me know when you are.
Right. I would actually say we can either talk about it now or we can talk about it tomorrow at 5:00.
So you give them a choice.
Well, yeah, because if you say, let's talk about it someday,
right, when you're ready, they're like, okay, great. Well, how about in 15 years?
Exactly. Or preferably never. That would be really good if we just never talked about it.
So I guess the question is, what do you do in that circumstance where you want to have the conversation and the child is like totally reticent, can't deal, doesn't want to talk?
You give the child a choice. You say, well, we have to talk about this because, and the child may be like, I know all this already. We don't have to talk. I don't want to talk about it. My fingers in the ears. And the line that I encourage parents to use is, I know it's uncomfortable. I know you don't want to talk about it. I know you probably know more than I do about it. My job as the parent is to make sure that you have all the information that you need to stay safe. And unless that information comes out of my mouth, I can't be sure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to come out of my mouth. And we can either do it tonight after dinner or tomorrow after dinner. And of course, then the child will pick tomorrow after dinner. And then, you get to tomorrow after dinner and you're, okay, we're going to have this conversation. You say, listen, you don't have to say a thing. You can put a pillow over your head.
Right.
And that's fine. Pull the blankets up over you.
If you don't want to say anything, you just have to listen.
I'm just going to tell you what I feel that you need, the information that I feel that you need to make good choices.
And can I just reiterate this idea that we've talked about before? It just made me think of it, is keep it simple, keep it truthful, answer only what's been asked. So this idea, because you're going to feel uncomfortable and that you don't necessarily need to go on for 15 minutes. Wouldn't you agree? Like, this is a circumstance to kind of keep those things in mind?
Always. Yeah. Keep it short. And, then the child may be like, okay, are we done? And you say, yes, for now we're done, unless you have any questions. And if they don't have questions, then the next talk, you build upon what you've already said.
Yeah.
So, because you can't necessarily get all the information in a really short amount of time.
Well, yeah, and especially if it's very uncomfortable too. Now you've gotten through that first, so it's going to be less so the next time because you've gotten through the first excruciating part, perhaps. Like it'll be at least a little less excruciating.
Right.
And even in the anecdote you tell in the book about the mom, because the anecdote was that she found a condom.
Yes.
And he was 13 and she was suddenly like, oh my, what? I don't think they'd talked very much about it. And she was actually it was very, very difficult for her to do. She was embarrassed, but she felt it was important to do it. So the kid was completely mortified, had the pillow over his face. But what was interesting as you were telling the story is that I don't even know that he ever removed the pillow, but she could tell he was listening. He was taking it in, that slowly it got a little bit better, and that they may have even revisited it. So the idea is that, be ready because it might be total go off the rails the first time.
Right.
But if you can get through that first part of it, and I'm not saying this happens in every circumstance. I feel like I think my wife and our daughters, my son, I mean, I did a little bit of it. She did a lot. That it generally went okay. So it can too, but they also might be
right.
mortified.
And I want parents to be prepared for what happens if their child is very uncomfortable, right? Because if it goes smoothly, great. I mean, that's easy peasy, right? But if it doesn't go smoothly, parents can be left wondering, well, that didn't go well, so now what do I do? Sort of situation. But again, Greg, kind of this idea that it's not just one big talk that you have, but it's a series of talks that you have. It gives you a length of time where not only can you establish comfort, but you can give it in short enough bursts that the child can take it in without getting overwhelmed by it. And then you can move on to the next piece. And that's, that's a much more natural flow than sitting down and saying, okay, we're going to have human sexuality 101.
I mean, I feel overwhelmed just thinking about it. If you're literally going to sit down and of course it's going to feel like, oh my God, we're doing the giant talk.
Exactly.
I mean,
and at some point, you have to realize at some point, it's so much that the child shuts off.
Yeah, it's too much.
Yeah. So they're going to miss whatever, 9/10 of it.
Right.
If you keep talking.
Keep it simple, keep it truthful, answer only what's been asked. I mean, I think another idea that we talk about in a lot of different circumstances on this podcast is what's kind of amazing about it is that at a very early age, you set up the idea that there are consequences to your choices, right? So if you early on talk about STDs, pregnancies, having sex against your wishes, if you're sort of able to establish that stuff. So then down the road, when they're in those circumstances, you've laid this groundwork that they're going to hopefully make better choices, that they understand like, oh yeah, there's consequences to this if I don't wear a condom,
Right, exactly. And I've kind of recently come up with this thought, talking about instead of talking about like good choices versus bad choices, talking about what's a safe choice, what's an unsafe choice, and then what's a dangerous choice. Because you can start that conversation about choices at a very young age without putting a moral weight on it.
The good or bad, you mean?
Right. So you can say
that's cool. So you want to eliminate that maybe from the equation,
from the beginning, right? So that when they get to be teenagers and they desire sex, right? Instead of thinking, I desire sex, I must be a bad person because that would be a bad choice. They can think, is this a safe choice? Is this a dangerous choice? Is this an unsafe choice? Because, all of those factors are going to depend upon who they're with, what kind of birth control they're on, or what kind of, disease prevention they've taken. And then they can make a choice that's safe as opposed to a choice that's unsafe or dangerous.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think that there's a difference. For a while, I thought, well, is it safe versus dangerous choices? But I think there's a middle thing that's just unsafe choices. Because, like, if you put your hand on top of a flame, right, a candle, that's a dangerous choice.
Right.
Because, it's going to burn you. An unsafe choice would be, let's say you get to a street, you're going to cross the street, you don't have the light, you don't have the walk sign, but there's no cars coming. That's kind of an unsafe choice because a car could pull out.
Sure.
A car could whip around the corner. It's an unsafe choice. If you come to that same street and you have the walk sign and you look both ways and there's no cars coming, that's a safe choice. So I think there's a kind of a middle ground, but there are some choices that are really dangerous, and choices that involve the potential to either get pregnant or get a sexually transmitted infection. Those are dangerous choices.
Right. And can affect the rest of your life.
But it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Right. So you don't have to have that moral weight, that guilt,
that's
that
great.
shame.
But you're also setting up that dynamic so they're at least if you can set up that dynamic, then they're thinking about it in the moment in terms of choices.
Right.
And not whether, I think that's a really actually excellent, that it's not good or bad. It's like, is this safe or unsafe?
Right.
Does this choice even make sense for me and my well-being,
Yes. And you can do it from such a young age because, we all teach toddlers to look both ways before crossing the street. We teach toddlers to hold our hand. Holding mommy or daddy's hand is a safe choice, right?
As opposed to a good choice.
I think the idea of lifting the morals off of that and not having them think of themselves as a good person or a bad person, but more as, what am I actively doing? I'm actively making a choice. What kind of choice am I making?
Yeah, and then it seems like it's around values, too, and how you live your life as opposed to you're a good or bad person.
Exactly.
So we can sort of finish up. We've kind of gone through all three of these because throughout the episode, but I think I want to revisit a little bit. So if we break it down into three components, how do you talk to your kids about sex? The first is the facts. Obviously, that's body parts, STDs, birth control, what goes where and when, masturbation, wet dreams, all of that sort of encompasses facts. You talk about reassurance, which we've sort of already talked about a little bit, and this idea of reassuring a child that might have some fears of anxiety around whether it's their desires. I think in the book you talk about, like, a real obvious example of this is if your child maybe is experiencing desires or sexual feelings towards the same sex, right? And this idea is that, what is your idea? Is it that it's about just accepting them, loving them for who they are, creating a safe environment for them?
Right. And normalizing, everybody feels attracted to somebody based just on like me as a person, right? Julie, I feel attracted to a certain type of person, a certain gender person. But if I felt attracted to someone who was also female, that would be completely normal. That's fine. If I was attracted to someone who was transgender, that's also fine. There's no moral weight to that either. We are who we are, and our attraction to someone else is, I have to say it again, normal. It's okay, right? I think the thing that's sad to me is when parents have a very rigidly prescribed idea of the gender or sexuality of the person that they should be attracted to. And the problem with that is that if you look at suicide rates, it's extremely high for people who are not cisgender heterosexual people, right?
Right.
The suicide rate is extremely high if you fall out of that category, and if you have parents who don't accept you.
Yeah, of course. And I think, those are difficult conversations if you're a parent that feels that way.
Yeah.
But understand that if that's what you're expressing to the child, even subtly, even passive aggressively or directly, you're just setting up a shame spiral. Because it's basically you're just saying to them, I don't accept you for who you are, and it's a problem. And what child is going to be able to take that and feel good about themselves, especially from a parental figure?
Right.
So, I want to feel like this is kind of an obvious idea in this day and age.
But it's not.
No, it's not.
I wish it was. But there's a certain percentage of the population who believes that it's morally wrong. And every once in a while, I come up against one of these people.
In your practice, you mean?
Yeah, it's not very often because
we're in New York City.
We're in New York City, and it's pretty progressive and pretty diverse. But every once in a while, I have it come up because a child has come out, and I'm very frank. I'm like, well, do you want to keep your beliefs or do you want to keep your child? Because at very best case scenario, you'll probably lose the relationship with your child. Worst case scenario, but still likely, is that they'll take their own life.
Right.
Because all we want as kids is to be loved and accepted by our parents.
Of course.
That our parents are important to us. And when they don't accept or love us for something as basic as who we are,
right,
that is extremely challenging to reconcile with living a happy life.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Heavy but true.
Heavy but true.
So I think we basically covered it. We touched on, because the last component was articulating, in terms of a sex talk, talking to your children about sex, articulating your values. We touched on that a little bit. Is that, how you feel about sex before marriage, casual sex, the role of love and trust in a relationship. And would you say the idea is that in these conversations, you can impart how you feel, but it's not about this is how it is, but you can say, Mom and I, or whatever the dynamic is, believe that, we don't really believe in casual sex. We think it can be dangerous, or A, B, and C. I don't know. Does that make sense? Like, what do you mean when you talk about imparting your values?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think...
Because these days, casual sex among younger people feels more prevalent to me. So I don't know if it's to say...
prevalent.
Yeah, to say that it's bad, you can't have casual sex, I think...
That's ostrich in the head in the sand again.
What do you mean?
Well, because they're going to.
Right.
They're just... I agree with you. I'm privy to a lot of information, obviously, about kids. And casual sex, because sex is fun, is kind of the knowledge.
So
the belief system that these kids have. I think when we talk about imparting our values, we go back to the old standard I statements. In my opinion,
I feel,
I think,
and this is why,
I believe, and this is why. And the most important thing is for you to be safe. So if you believe differently, I just want you to be safe kind of attitude is what you want to have. But I think you're right, Greg. I think kids today, don't necessarily.
When I was having sex as a okay.
I was, uphill snow.
Yeah, exactly. I was walking up a hill when I did it without shoes. You never had to do that when you had sex. Okay, go ahead.
Exactly. I mean, I think this idea of sex is fun and casual, and as long as it's done in a mutually respectful way, that it doesn't have to be a long. I'm just saying what I hear kids saying. I'm not saying what my personal belief is. But, that kids are feeling like, why do we have to put all this weight on sex? If we're being safe, if we honor the other person and, and they respect us, why not? Why not have multiple sexual partners as long as it's safe? Why not?
Sure.
Kind of thing. So I think that's, as parents are listening to this, they have to understand that that's kind of the philosophy that I'm hearing espoused by kids who are in their adolescent to late adolescent years at this point in time. Wasn't it in the 60s? Free love?
Sure.
So kind of what goes around comes around.
Right. Yeah, and then we've been through phases where it gets more provincial and...
Right. And so, what I advise parents to say is, look, I believe you should wait to have sex until you're older or, until you're in a serious relationship. And I realize that the way you might think about it is different. And I'm not encouraging you to do that. I would prefer that you wait. And my job is to keep you safe. And here's all the information so that you own all of that, those values that you're carrying around for whatever reason. And by all means, add, I believe you should wait. And here's why I believe that.
Right.
Because for me, sex is a very intimate act. I feel closer to a person, when I've been intimate in that way with that person. And I feel more vulnerable and more likely to be hurt. And so the reason that I say wait is so that you don't get hurt.
Right. And so but again, you're articulating your values around it as opposed to sort of putting on this idea of how it should be.
It's just my values, and kids formulate their own values as they grow, and there's nothing we can do to stop that, right? Many, many people believe that your kid has to actually reject your values in order to come back around to those same values. And that makes sense to me because they're looking for independence. They're looking for differentiation. So they're going to say things that they may not even mean, whether it's about sex or something else. They're going to do things, that differentiate themselves from you. So rather than drawing a hard line in the sand, don't you dare under my roof, which just gives them something to differentiate against.
Sure.
It gives them something to push against. Instead, if you explain what your values are and why, and what your hope for them is, and that you realize that, this may be something that they do, that it may be a choice that they make, no matter what your own values are, that you just want them to make a safe choice.
Okay, just to wrap up, and I know I put you on the spot sometimes. You can't literally wrap this all up in 2 or 3 words, but if there were a few things you would say to parents to keep in mind when they're talking to their kids about sex, just a few general things to kind of recap, what would they be?
I think the main point is you can't educate without communicating with your child. So if you want to educate your child about making good choices, making safe choices around sexual behaviors, you have to communicate early and often, because that equals a full education so that they can make choices that aren't high risk. Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com. Or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
See you next time.